Welcome to episode 22 of the Strategic Momentum Podcast. I'm your host, Connie Steele. WGN Morning News is the #1 morning news show in Chicago. As a station that's been around for 70 years, they have a unique brand that people trust, a brand that today's guest, executive producer of the show, Aline Cox, strives to maintain. It's not necessarily easy separating opinion from fact to deliver real news today, and it can be an ongoing challenge when retaining an audience because a battle for their time and attention is even more intense now, as they can get the news on their phone through social networks, apps, in addition to the breadth of choices on TV. Today, Aline shares how the WGN Morning News team continues to evolve every day, testing and learning to determine what makes good TV, yet staying true to their brand. Thanks so much for joining us today, Aline.
Oh, happy to be here.
You've been in the broadcasting industry for most of your career, with much of it being on the television side. So I'd love for you to share how you even got started in this business and what it took you to get to where you are today.
Well, to make a long story short, I fell into the business somewhat. I wanted to spend a summer in Madison, where we went to college together. And so I decided to get an internship. And back in those days, we had phone books. And my parents said, since you don't have a job and you don't need college credit, get an internship. So I was thumbing through the phone book and I got to the letter T, and television sounded intriguing. And that day, I called up the television station that I watched the evening news the night before and got to the anchor and said, I'd like to stay in Madison for the summer, and I think you'd really like me. Do you have internships? And the woman told me that they had picked their interns months and months earlier than when I had called. But I convinced the woman to give me an interview and told her that she'd like me. And in the end, she did hire me. And then from that first day interning at the ABC affiliate in Madison, Wisconsin, I realized I loved television. And that's how it all got started.
Wow. Who would have thought when you were at, University of Wisconsin with me, that all of a sudden you found your vocation just thumbing through a phone book?
Right. And that another important lesson from that is I just clicked with the female anchor, and I was a business major at the time. So I probably was not the most qualified. And I learned, and my dad had told me this earlier in life, that the best person often doesn't get hired for the job, because there have been other jobs I applied for where I was the most qualified, but I didn't click with the person hiring me. That was a good lesson, that apply for jobs, and even if you're not the most qualified, you may get it because you were the most liked.
So tell us about how that's led you, that first experience has ultimately led you to the work that you're doing today, because you are the executive producer for the top morning news show in Chicago.
So after I talked my way into a newsroom internship, I met the sports director of that station at a vending machine. And he said, "You look bored." And I said, "Oh my goodness, I'm so bored. I'd like to learn more." And he hired me as his sports intern, and I stayed there 6 months after graduating college. And then I switched stations, and that turned into a job. And I would cover Packers games and Badgers games, and I was a woman in the locker room after Packers games. And one day, walking down the concourse with all of my gear, I thought, I don't want to lug this camera around for my entire career. So I then focused on producing, and I always wanted to move back to Chicago, where I grew up. So I took a job producing at the 24-hour station and stayed there several years. And CLTV is owned by the same company as WGN. So then I became a writer at WGN, and then I've moved my way up at WGN. And that's also a valuable lesson, is once you're in the door, people will learn what you're good at and will see that you can do a whole lot more. So now I'm the morning executive producer at the station.
You've certainly seen a dramatic evolution occur in your business as a result of the rapid adoption of mobile and social technology. So, from mobile devices to social media, it's certainly changed the way we consume news. It would be great to get your perspective on how it's impacted journalism and the other challenges it's posed in your business.
The first thing is journalism isn't journalism anymore. When you look at websites, and it used to be the facts. Now you have to sift through those facts and weed out the bias. Sometimes you read one version on a news website and then you read a different version on a different website, and they're completely different stories. So what we try to do is, we know that people have an infinite amount of information, but we try to sift through that and provide the facts, because a lot of stuff on social media is not true. It's a race to being first versus being accurate. And at WGN, while we try to be first, we also try to be accurate and only present the facts and let our viewers decide the other points. Another issue with social media is college graduates don't focus on writing as much in school anymore. So when I hire our morning news writing interns, they often come in for an interview and they don't know how to write. Maybe that's because they're focused on writing compelling tweets and they don't know how to write a basic broadcast script anymore. And another point is, when we were growing up, people would wake up to their clock radio and turn on the TV right away. Now, people wake up with their phone as their alarm, and then they sift through Twitter and Facebook. So we have to get them to turn on their TV instead of relying on their phones for their information.
Right. So you now have a greater set of competition. And so you have to think about the different formats and this total multi-channel approach to pull them into watching the TV.
It has a lot of information, but we sift through that information and provide facts.
So given that, you've talked about these 3 points in impacting how you need to report and, socialize the news today, what have you and your station done specifically to address these challenges?
Well, the first thing, we are in a good spot because we have been a TV station in Chicago for 70 years. So our viewers inherently trust what we say, which is an awesome responsibility that we don't take lightly. So we know our reputation is on the line. So if we put a story out there, our viewers know that we've checked the facts and we've checked our sources and that they can trust us because we have been on the air for so long. And our morning news team has been together for 20 years. So our viewers have come to know what to expect every morning. And what comes out of our anchor's mouth, they can trust. So every writer, every person has their own bias. And it's my job to eliminate that and to present the facts. But it's just not the bias of people in the WGN newsroom. It's nationwide. The people writing for CNN's website, even the Associated Press. It used to be factual. Now there is some bias in some of their wire copies. There was a story a couple of weeks ago about that the United States spends $610 billion for its defense, and the military spends $610 billion. And the headline on the source copy for the writer at WGN was the cost of being at war for 8 years. The defense's military budget is $610 billion. And our writer wrote it as the cost of being the world's policeman. Our defense spending was $610 billion. Well, it doesn't matter that this writer called us the world's policeman, and it doesn't matter that this other website said the cost of being at war. So I eliminated all of that and just presented the facts that here's how much the military spends. This is how it compares to the rest of the world. But it's interesting because a few years ago, every website, the headline would just be, here's how much the military spends per year, or this is how much is in its budget. And now it's changed that there's subtle bias in a lot of the websites and the news stories. So it's my job to eliminate all of that.
And it's all with the intention of trying to attract more people? Is it that whoever has the most eye-catching or almost sensationalistic headline will be the one that attracts the eyeball?
Maybe, right. It's become headline grabbing, right? What can fit into a tweet? What will make people click on the headline to get more paid web views? Yeah, probably.
Well, you've got a pretty incredible responsibility to stay neutral and truly report the facts and ensure that your viewership who has trusted you with the facts because they've grown up with you, or with the younger generation that didn't grow up with TV as a core habit of theirs, waking up every morning and watching Good Morning America or the Today Show. And what else do you do to make sure that they know that you do stay true?
Well, personally, I watch, for national stories, I watch MSNBC, Fox, and CNN every night and see how they craft the story. So when I get in and read a script, I can say, oh, that writer must lean more toward watching this station because that's how that's written. And that I have found as helpful because I can find the subtle bias that maybe other people who didn't listen to Rush Limbaugh or MSNBC the night before would know. So that has helped me. And with people who don't know us, we just try to get it right every day. So if they happen to be on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram for the first time and see us, that they like what they see, and then they tune us in and they realize, oh yeah, they are sticking to the facts. And they give us another chance the next day.
Aline and everyone at WGN Morning News clearly care a lot about staying true to their audience because they know they inherently trust them. By being real, it means sifting through opinions and delivering the facts. No small feat when everyone is writing with a bias. But news is still a business, and it's not enough to only give just the facts. You have to get your audience's attention, and in different ways. So staying relevant, staying real, becomes a delicate balance. And the WGN Morning News team constantly tries new things to attract and engage their audience. So what does this balancing act look like in action?
Our news is news with fun. So to get around people not turning on the TV, our station, yes, we give you the headlines, but then we also provide a unique experience for our viewers. So our viewers know if they don't tune in, they may miss something that was not planned. We have a lot of spontaneous moments in our show that nobody can predict. We are consistently inconsistent on WGN Morning News. So while you can get your news, sports, and weather across so many different social media platforms, it's not delivered in the same way. And anyone can tell the story about the deer going into the building. You'll see that story told hundreds of times on local television, but nobody tells it the way we do. And we use Facebook Live, we use Twitter, Instagram, we use all the social media platforms to drive people to our TV station to say, you don't want to miss what's coming up tomorrow.
Is that this element of your station where it's about a bit of the fun and unpredictability? Would you say that's sort of a core part of your brand?
It has become that of the morning news. We mix news with fun and we do the news correctly. So our viewers know that if today, for instance, we drove a viewer to the hospital because he emailed us asking if we would. And we said, sure. So our viewers know if we're driving this viewer to the hospital on air, we have already covered them with the bad weather through our area and the situation around the world. So our viewer lets us have fun because they know that we've already covered the news for them of the day. And yeah, it's become part of our brand.
And would you say that brand development, given that there is so much competition for someone's time and attention, has been another critical facet of doing business in your station where it might not have been, say, 10, 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think that's how we've been able to stay successful as the number one morning news. Because if we were straight news, you can get the Bulls scores and the Bulls highlights or the Cubs scores immediately, right? But in the past, you would have to turn on the news or read the newspaper to find out the scores. So our sportscaster, everybody in Chicago knows he just doesn't give the sports scores because everyone can look on their phone for the Cubs game the day before. But they tune in to see what Pat is going to say about the Cubs game yesterday.
And so another thing that you brought up is that the anchors that you've had have been there for 20 years. People trust them because there's this reliability that comes into play. That obviously seems to be another big part of your brand. So how do you make sure that you balance this important, I guess it's called core promise in your brand around the reliability of the facts and this element of fun?
We have somehow mastered that balance. Last week, when the 3 Americans were released by North Korea, we beat CNN. We looked at CNN and we had the breaking news on before CNN, which is pretty amazing for this station in Chicago. And we know that if big news happens, everything else gets blown out. So even if we had a big named actress or we had a big event planned, we often have a block party at a viewer's house or in a town, that all gets canceled so we can cover the big news of the day.
So another thing that you and I have talked about in the past is the importance of really knowing your viewership. And you had mentioned that you guys have been around for 70 years. People trust you. So I get the sense that you've got a pretty good sense of the details around your audience, their interests, and their likes. So how has that actually changed over time? And how does that play into helping you balance, adjust, create the types of programming that you do in the morning?
We know our audience, but more importantly, we know what makes good television. So what I would want to watch on TV is the same as my sister, who's a stay-at-home mom with children who are older, which is also the same as my dad, who is retired. People like to watch good television. So while we cover the news well, and people who watch the news want to see the news covered well, so we do that. But then our other stories and segments, we try to make good television that people can't turn off, which is universal. So we try to make compelling TV for anyone to watch and not turn us off.
How does you and your team determine what would be compelling TV? Because that, to me, also can be subjective. And knowing that everybody seems to write with the bias or thinks of programming potentially that could have a slant towards one group or another, how do you guys determine what universally would be good television for your audience?
We meet every day at 10:30 and we go through what worked and what didn't work. And oftentimes someone will bring up, for instance, a couple of years ago, Tom Hanks was going to come in studio. And the other stations he went to would just sit on the anchor desk and interview him. But during the meeting, people were throwing out ideas. So a lot of it's brainstorming. And when everyone in the room or most people in the room say, let's give that a shot, or, oh, we haven't done that before, then you have a good idea. And this idea was to gather people in the building put them in costumes of all of Tom Hanks' characters. Don't ask Tom Hanks if he wants to do this before he comes to the station, and get his reaction when his characters come out of the closet and down the hallway. And his reaction was great. And it made a unique TV watching experience. And you didn't get that reaction from Tom Hanks on any other TV station in the country, which is what our viewers have come to expect. If every station has Tom Hanks on their show, they know it will be a unique interview on WGN Morning News.
So it sounds like you've been able to figure out, let's call it this sort of test and learn approach where you're ideating, you're meeting every morning, coming up with ideas, and then seeing what works and what doesn't, but ensuring at the end of the day, there's an authenticity around it that fundamentally aligns to your brand.
Right. And if you are driving through Chicago, our billboards say real. And that is the brand, the slogan for the WGN Morning News. It's what you get is what you get. And you mentioned things going well. Some of our best moments were when things didn't go well and they went so wrong that it became great television. Our audio board went out. So for several minutes, our anchors couldn't talk. So we gave them whiteboards and they wrote to the viewers.
Really?
And that ended up being very compelling television.
Wow. So it's this idea that failure, because that could be seen as failure. And it sounds like in this case, you want a fear of failure isn't necessarily seen as failure. It could be seen as an opportunity.
Right. If we're going to fail, we might fail so hard that it becomes good. That could be our next slogan.
Aline tells me that they get their ratings every night, which she looks at to see how they did. While she does learn from that, Aline doesn't make a change just because, as their long-term performance isn't determined by a single-day ratings report. Day-to-day, there will be fluctuations, but she takes that information to help understand and even validate if they may have been on or off brand.
We look at our ratings every night. We have overnight ratings and they come out the next morning. We look at them, and we've been fortunate enough to be number one for several years. So we don't look at the data and make a change just because the day before was great or less than stellar. But there have been times where we have thought, oh, are we having too much fun? And we'd go to the data and look at it and say, yeah, we think we are having too much fun. Let's make sure we are doing the news correctly. And then we reel ourselves back in and make sure we're doing the news correctly first, and then we can have fun. So we make minor adjustments.
Well, it definitely sounds like ensuring that, your brand and staying true to your brand is first and foremost. So with all the data that you've got and seeing the execution of what you guys have done, you're always aligned to make sure that does it stay true to who you are and adjust accordingly.
Correct. And I think our brand of being real is very strong because public relations people will often send out a mass pitch to all of the producers. And all of the producers will turn that PR person down immediately because we all know, oh boy, that will never work on our show. Or sometimes we'll all get the same pitch and we can think of a way to make it unique to our station. But it is interesting. Most of the time, we all know the show so well that we know how a segment's going to go before it gets planned out, that we all have the same vision, which is pretty spectacular. And I think that adds to our success.
So it's really interesting you said that it seems like it's core to everybody's DNA that they know what will intuitively align to the brand of the station and that you guys fundamentally live and breathe it, that it's embedded in the way that you work versus, in a lot of other companies, it's something that they strive to have, but, it's more of a, They think if I do this, then my brand holds true. But at the end of the day, a brand is really about living and breathing it day to day.
Right. And maybe we would want to have our brand be more fancy. But, I greeted Isaiah Thomas today who used to play for the Pistons. And we have Cheez-Its and Doritos in our green room, which is our brand. Even though you may want to serve shrimp and escargot, that's not our morning news brand. So it's somewhat fitting that we have Cheez-Its and Skinny Pop in our green room because our brand is real, and that's true. And our anchors are just how they are on TV as they are in person.
And I love the point that you made that it sounds like to really evolve and stay current in your brand, it's important to understand what works and what doesn't, because you have to test and learn. In light of all these new channels, you never know what could make good television. But making sure that, when you take that data, it's not as total truth, that there is some creativity that has to be involved. And over time, you'll figure out what that right recipe is for success.
Yeah, and I think we are lucky that we can take risks. Right? Good Morning America would never call a cell phone number that we think is a certain celebrity cell phone number and see if she'll pick up at 6:30 in the morning, right? They wouldn't do that. But we did that a couple of weeks ago. Someone had an old cell phone number for a celebrity, and it was her birthday. And we didn't even know if that was the right number, but we called it, and we didn't know if she would answer or not. But that makes good TV because people wanted to tune in to see if she would answer.
Do you think people have mastered television coupled with the social media channels and the other outlets, digital outlets that people consume information from?
No. That's definitely not. It's a learning curve. People are testing out new things, new ways, trying to get, people to watch television, and then, getting them from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and how to get them to turn on their TVs. It's a ever-going process.
Do you feel like the culture of broadcast television certainly has changed to be much more open as a result of the fact that you're trying to merge or marry those two, such that there's a greater openness to testing, learning, trying, and see what may stick and what may not?
Right. We do that every day, right? We'll test out something. Oh, that seemed to work. Or, oh, that probably wasn't a good thing we tried. But for social media, it used to be, oh, let's post a story to the web, or, oh, let's get it to Facebook when we can. Now it's a huge priority, which I'm sure it is in every newsroom. The social media platforms have become a lot bigger of a part of everybody's job in the newsroom than it was 5 years ago.
Are there any takeaways you want to share with listeners as it relates to the business side of what you do and that you think has universal relevance in any industry?
Well, we all know on the news side that we are in business, and it is a business, and we have to work with our sales team. But we have stayed true to the journalism that we all went to school for. But we understand that they need to make money selling commercials. So in our 9 o'clock hour, we have an announcer who does paid commercials. But being true to journalism, the viewer knows that whenever he is talking about a product, that is a commercial. And whenever our anchors are talking about a product, nobody paid for them to talk about that product. And again, that goes back to trust. Our viewers trust our anchors. So if an anchor says, oh, I love Coke, that just was an ad lib, and they must really love Coke, and Coke isn't paying them to say that. And there are new opportunities for sales that we have to work with, but we always stay true to who we are.
So, Aline, to close, you have any last words of wisdom from not just a business perspective, but maybe even from a professional development perspective too?
In my life, I guess what I have learned that there are a lot of jobs out there that are easier. You don't have to work as hard and they pay a lot more. But I found out at a very early age that I loved broadcasting. And now that I found out I loved it, there is no turning back. I can't imagine doing anything else. I wake up at 3 a.m. You have to love what you do in order to get up that early in the morning. And I had an intern working for us a couple of years ago, and our business is very meticulous and we operate by the second. And I could tell this intern was annoyed. And I told her, if that annoys you, that's the whole business. And she's now working in insurance. And that was a good move because she didn't love it. So it's not a business if you don't love it. And I think just putting out a unique product, which is not just for broadcasting, our product is unique. And I think in business, if you have a unique product that a lot of people like, that's success. And luckily we have that with the WGN Morning News.
And finally, what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
Well, they can reach out to me on Facebook, Aline Cox, or my email is acox, A-C-O-X, @WGNTV.com.
Great. Thanks so much, Aline, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Aline's story shows us that the business challenges of staying relevant among our audience exist across every industry. With increased competition and technology constantly shifting consumer behavior, it's more important than ever to have a trusted relationship. And people increasingly only want to interact with businesses that they trust. But you also have to evolve and keep up with the changing dynamics. So test, learn, and iterate to see what works and what doesn't, while staying true to your brand, which is what drew your audience to you in the first place. For Aline and the WGN Morning News team, that means maintaining a delicate balance between reporting the facts and delivering unpredictable fun. It's their unique brand promise. Sometimes the pendulum swings too far one way or the other. Sometimes they may even fail, but that's just another opportunity to learn and adjust, and it might even make for good TV. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. You can connect with Aline by email at acox@WGNTV.com. And you can keep up with the WGN Morning News team at WGNTV.com. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show on iTunes and leave us a review. You can also find us in the Google Play Store, Spotify, and Stitcher Radio. If you want to hear previous episodes or even get show notes from this episode, you can also visit us on our podcast page at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.